Around 20,000 years ago, the world began to change in ways no living creature could fully comprehend. Warm valleys that once echoed with the sounds of life grew silent under the slow march of frost. The sun still rose each morning, but its warmth seemed weaker, distant, as if the heavens themselves had turned their face away from the earth. Winds grew harsher, carrying with them tiny shards of ice that cut through skin and fur alike. Rain turned to snow, and snow to endless white plains stretching beyond the horizon. The Ice Age had begun, a time when the balance of life tilted toward extinction, and only those who could adapt would endure. Across the continents, glaciers advanced like colossal beasts, swallowing forests and grinding mountains into dust. Rivers froze mid-flow, and lakes became mirrors of glass. Entire ecosystems collapsed under the suffocating weight of cold. Herds of animals migrated farther south, chased by hunger and instinct, while predators followed close behind. Humanity, still young and fragile, found itself standing at the edge of survival, a small flicker of life in a world gone silent. The very planet that once nurtured them had turned against them, and the question was simple yet terrifying. How could they possibly survive the age of ice? For early humans, this transformation was not just a physical trial, but a spiritual one. They did not have the knowledge to explain climate cycles or atmospheric shifts. To them, the world was alive. The mountains, the rivers, even the wind had spirits. When the snow came and refused to leave, it must have felt as though some great cosmic power had been angered. Thunder became a god's voice, blizzards a punishment, and warmth a fading memory. Fear took root deep in their bones, but so did determination. The human instinct to endure began to harden, much like the world around them. The Ice Age did not strike all at once. It crept forward, year by year, winter by winter. Crops failed in the warmer regions. The animals that once grazed in open meadows began to disappear. Food became scarce, and tribes were forced to move, following the last traces of warmth and life. It was the first great migration of humankind, not for conquest or exploration, but for survival. The landscape that had once been familiar and forgiving now became a frozen labyrinth where one wrong step could mean death. And yet, amid the endless whiteness, life persisted. The first snow shelters were built from ice and bone. Fires were kindled in the darkest caves. Families huddled together for warmth, their breath fogging the cold air, their eyes fixed on the flickering flames that separated them from the void. Even in the harshest blizzards, the human heart refused to surrender. In that defiance, something remarkable was born: resilience, cooperation, and the beginnings of ingenuity. The Ice Age would strip humanity of comfort, but in doing so, it would forge their identity. The frozen dawn was not just the beginning of an age. It was the birth of the human spirit as we know it. From the moment the first ice crystals settled on their skin, humans learned to see the world differently, not as masters, but as survivors. Every frozen breath was a reminder that they were small, fragile, and yet capable of extraordinary endurance. The Ice Age would test them in every imaginable way, but it would also awaken something powerful within them. The understanding that survival is not only about strength, but about unity, memory, and the fire that burns unseen within. Before the world was swallowed by ice, there was a time when the earth still breathed warmth and color. Great forests stretched across the continents, rivers sang through fertile valleys, and the air carried the scent of life. Herds of animals roamed freely: mammoths, reindeer, wild horses, and bison, moving with the rhythm of the seasons. Early humans thrived in this landscape, their small bands living close to the land, hunting and gathering under the open sky. Days were long and golden, and nights were calm, filled with the crackle of fire and the murmur of stories told in tongues long forgotten. These were the final generations who would know the world in its gentler form. They hunted with confidence, tracking animals whose paths were predictable and abundant. They gathered fruits, nuts, and roots without fear of scarcity. Children played near riverbanks, and hunters returned home with full hands and proud hearts. In these moments, life seemed eternal, the rhythm of nature unbroken and kind. Yet, in the stillness of those peaceful evenings, faint whispers of change began to stir. The air grew drier. Seasons lingered longer than they should. Winters bit deeper each year, and the elders began to speak of times when snow refused to melt. At first, the signs were subtle, a slight chill that came earlier in autumn, a frost that killed the crops too soon. But nature's warnings were relentless. Slowly, the great herds began to shift their routes, migrating farther south. Forests thinned as trees died in the cold. Rivers slowed, their surfaces hardening into glass. The people watched with growing unease, realizing that the balance that had sustained them for generations was beginning to fracture. They could not yet understand what was happening, but they could feel it. The world was changing, and not for the better. The first reaction was disbelief. For early humans, the environment was not an enemy. It was their provider, their home. When the game became scarce, they believed it would return next season. When frost damaged the plants, they waited for the thaw. But when the thaw never came, desperation began to creep into their lives. The warmth they once took for granted became precious, sacred even. Families began to hoard firewood and animal fat. Shelters grew sturdier, lined with hides and bones. The laughter that once filled the nights grew quieter, replaced by the low hum of uncertainty. Still, they adapted, because adaptation was their only choice. Hunters traveled farther, staying away for days at a time, tracking animals that now roamed the edge of the known world. The women and elders learned to preserve what little food remained, drying meat over smoke and storing it in pits beneath the earth. Slowly, their way of life began to change. The easy abundance of the old world faded, replaced by something colder, harder, more deliberate. Every meal became a victory, every fire a small rebellion against the encroaching cold. It was during this slow transformation that human intelligence began to sharpen. Necessity demanded creativity. They learned to read the stars more carefully, to predict storms and follow migrating herds. They began to cooperate more closely, sharing resources, tools, and knowledge. The concept of community deepened, forged by hardship. What once were scattered family groups began to form larger tribes, bound not only by blood, but by survival. The world outside was changing faster than they could comprehend, but within their growing unity lay the first spark of civilization. And yet, there was mourning. The elders, who remembered the warmth of endless summers, spoke of a time when the earth was generous, when fruits grew wild and rivers never froze. To the younger ones, these stories sounded like myths, tales of a paradise that no longer existed. Around the fires, people whispered about angry spirits or gods who had turned away from mankind. The belief that the earth itself had become sick took hold, and rituals of pleading and offering began to appear, early signs of the human search for meaning in suffering. As the last generation of warmth gave way to the first generation of frost, something inside humanity changed forever. The people who once danced under the summer sun now huddled together for warmth, gazing into fires as if trying to remember what the world used to feel like. The land that had been their provider had turned into a test of their endurance. They were not yet aware of it, but this slow dying of the warmth would mark the beginning of their greatest transformation. The earth was closing its doors to comfort. The forests were vanishing, the skies grew heavy with snow, and the silence of winter was spreading its hand across the world. But within that silence, a new kind of strength was being born, one that would define humanity for thousands of years to come. The last warmth of the old world was fading, and in its dying light, the first survivors of the Ice Age were rising. Then came the winter that never ended. What had begun as small shifts in temperature erupted into a full-scale transformation of the planet. Snow no longer melted in spring. It simply layered upon itself, year after year, until the earth was buried beneath an empire of ice. Mountains disappeared under frozen caps. Forests cracked, and fell beneath the crushing weight of frost. The seas retreated, locked away in massive glaciers that stretched for thousands of miles. The air itself seemed heavier, sharper, every breath a reminder that the world was no longer a place of comfort, but of endurance. Humanity stood at the edge of extinction, staring into a future colder than death itself. Imagine standing at dawn, your breath turning instantly to frost, the sun a pale, ghostly orb that gives no warmth. The once green valleys are now fields of white silence. Even the wind has changed its voice, a low, endless howl that cuts through the bones. Food has vanished, and so have the animals that once roamed freely. The herds have gone south, far beyond reach, and the ground that once offered roots and tubers is frozen solid. For early humans, each day became a test of willpower. Hunger clawed at their stomachs, frostbite nipped at their fingers and toes, and fear grew inside their hearts like a shadow that refused to leave. The Ice Age was not a single storm, but 1,000 years of punishment. Generations were born and died without ever knowing true warmth. Children grew up never seeing green leaves or hearing birdsong. The few fires that still burned inside caves were tended like sacred altars. One spark could mean the difference between life and oblivion. Families huddled together, wrapped in animal hides, whispering prayers to unseen spirits as blizzards raged outside. The nights were long, sometimes stretching so far that time itself felt broken. Even the strongest among them began to doubt whether the sun would ever return. In this frozen chaos, fear became both an enemy and a teacher. To survive, humans had to learn from the cold, to read the signs of storms, to sense the movement of ice, and to track animals through blinding snow. Every mistake carried a price. A fire built in the wrong place could choke them with smoke. A shelter too close to a cliff could collapse under the weight of snow. But those who adapted, those who watched, listened, and learned, survived. This was the crucible of evolution, where the careless perished and the careful grew stronger. Nature had turned ruthless, and humanity had to match her cruelty with intelligence. The psychological toll was immense. The cold wasn't just around them, it seeped into their minds. Isolation bred silence. Silence bred despair. Caves that once echoed with laughter became quiet tombs of endurance. People began to see the world in shades of gray and white, the concept of color fading from memory. Some tribes vanished entirely. Their remains later found frozen in the ice, preserved like echoes of failure. But others refused to give up. They found new ways to hunt, new ways to build, and new ways to hope. Even when the odds seemed impossible, the will to live burned faintly, a fragile ember that refused to die. It was during these dark centuries that humanity's greatest transformation took place. The harshness of the Ice Age did not destroy them, it forged them. They learned to cooperate like never before, to share warmth and knowledge, to protect the weak and honor the strong. The tribe became everything. No one survived alone. Around every flickering firelight, a code of survival was born, silent, unspoken, but absolute. Protect each other or perish together. That bond, that instinct for unity, became the foundation of all future civilizations. The Great Freeze also gave birth to the first myths, stories told to make sense of the endless suffering. The elders spoke of spirits that lived inside the glaciers, of sky gods who had stolen the warmth of the world, and of heroes who would someday bring the sun back. These were not mere tales. They were the psychological scaffolding that held their world together. When reality was unbearable, imagination became a form of survival. In those stories, they found courage, and in courage, they found meaning. For thousands of years, the Ice Age showed no mercy. It erased entire species, reshaped continents, and buried history under frozen silence. But against all odds, humanity endured. They were scarred, hardened, transformed, no longer the carefree gatherers of the past, but a new kind of creature, resilient, strategic, adaptable. The Great Freeze did not simply challenge them. It sculpted them into what they would one day become. The masters of change, the survivors of any storm. As the blizzards howled across endless tundras and the stars glittered coldly above, humanity's story narrowed to a single question. Would the fire within outlast the ice outside? In every cave, in every trembling breath, the answer was being written. Not in words, but in survival. And in that survival, the seeds of civilization were quietly taking root beneath the snow. As the ice tightened its grip on the earth, finding warmth became the single most important mission of survival. Fire alone was not enough. The flames could flicker and die in the open wind. What early humans needed was protection, a place to hide from the relentless storms that swept across the frozen plains. Shelter was no longer a luxury. It was life itself. And so began one of the most defining struggles in human history, the search for a home in a world that offered none. At first, people sought out what nature had already made. Caves became sanctuaries, hollowed out in the sides of cliffs and mountains, their dark interiors offering refuge from the blizzards outside. Within those rocky chambers, humans found something close to safety. They built small fires against the walls, their flames painting shadows that danced like spirits. The scent of smoke and animal fat filled the air, and the sound of wind howling beyond the cave mouth reminded them how fragile that safety truly was. The cave was both womb and prison. It sheltered them from death, yet confined them to darkness. Still, it was here, in these cold stone chambers, that humanity's first real homes were born. Inside these shelters, early humans began to organize their lives in new ways. Each corner of the cave had a purpose, one side for sleeping, another for cooking, another for tool-making. The flickering fire in the center became the heart of their world, its light the center of their existence. Families gathered around it, sharing warmth and stories, building bonds that grew stronger with every night survived. The outside world had become an enemy, but inside the cave, they forged something powerful: community. The experience of sharing space, of surviving together, was slowly shaping the human mind toward cooperation and planning. But not every tribe was lucky enough to find a natural cave. Many had to build their own shelters in the open, exposed to the full cruelty of the Ice Age. With little more than bones, hides, and branches, they began crafting the earliest forms of architecture. Mammoth bones serve as the framework, massive ribs arched into domes and covered with layers of fur and earth. Inside, these bone huts trapped the precious heat from fires, turning freezing air into survivable warmth. These makeshift homes were small and crude, but to those who lived inside them, they were castles, sacred spaces where the storm could not reach. As tribes moved across the tundra, they carried their knowledge with them. Every new shelter was an improvement, every generation learning from the mistakes of the last. Some used blocks of packed snow, discovering that even ice, when shaped correctly, could hold heat. Others built walls from stones and clay, reinforced with animal hides. They began to understand the science of survival long before science had a name. How smoke should escape through holes in a roof, how air should circulate without stealing warmth, how light could be reflected by polished bones to brighten the dark. Necessity was teaching them engineering. Inside these shelters, life found rhythm again. Children played in the warmth of the firelight, their laughter muffled by the thick walls. Hunters returned with frozen meat, their breath steaming as they recounted the day's struggles. Women scraped hides, stretched sinew, and repaired clothing, their hands moving with purpose. The cold world outside had stripped away all comfort, yet inside these fragile homes, the essence of humanity endured. Love, fear, hope, and care all found their place within the flickering orange glow of the fire. But the struggle for shelter was not without danger. Avalanches could seal a cave entrance in moments. Fires could fill huts with choking smoke. Predators sometimes followed the scent of food and warmth, lurking just outside the walls. Every night was a reminder that safety was temporary, that nature's mercy was never guaranteed. The sound of the wind outside, shrieking like a living thing, kept them alert. In this balance between warmth and peril, they developed their keen senses, awareness of space, sound, and timing that would one day define human survival instincts. Caves and shelters became more than just places to rest. They became symbols, the first representations of human defiance against nature's indifference. Every stone placed, every hide stretched, was an act of rebellion. For the first time in history, humans were shaping their environment, not merely enduring it. These shelters were the seeds of architecture, the ancestors of every house, temple, and city to come. Within these cold sanctuaries, humanity learned what it meant to build, not just with hands, but with purpose and imagination. And as the snow fell endlessly outside, early humans would sit close to their fires, watching sparks drift upward toward the blackness of the cave roof. In that quiet, they must have wondered what lay beyond the next storm, whether the world would ever grow warm again, or if this frozen age would last forever. Yet the walls around them stood firm, their firelight flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. And in that heartbeat, the story of humanity continued, fragile, flickering, but unbroken. Long before the Ice Age reached its cruelest point, humanity had already discovered something that would change everything: fire. But during the endless winters, this gift became more than a tool. It became a god. It was light in the blackness, warmth in the cold, safety in a world of predators and death. Fire was the single thing that stood between survival and extinction. For early humans, learning to create, control, and protect, it was a sacred art, one that defined the very meaning of life. At first, fire was a mystery, something that belonged only to the heavens and the earth. It came from lightning strikes that set trees ablaze, or from volcanic eruptions that spewed molten rock across the land. To the first humans, these flames must have seemed alive, wild, dangerous, untamable. But curiosity drove them closer, inch by inch, until they learned that fire could be both friend and foe. When they first dared to touch its warmth instead of fleeing from it, humanity crossed an invisible line. For the first time, they had taken power from nature itself. Keeping fire alive, however, was no easy task. Sparks were rare, and flames fragile. Early tribes would guard their fires through the night, feeding them with wood, bones, and fat to keep the embers glowing. When a family moved to new hunting grounds, they would carry a burning stick wrapped in moss or bark, protecting it as though it were a living child. If the flame died during travel, panic followed, because without fire, they were blind, cold, and vulnerable. Thus, entire myths formed around it. Stories of the fire keepers, chosen members of the tribe who bore the responsibility of keeping the sacred flame alive. Losing it was not just a mistake, it was a tragedy. As knowledge spread, people learned how to make fire from nothing, a skill that transformed them completely. Rubbing sticks together until smoke rose, striking flint against pyrite to create sparks. These were acts of genius born from desperation. The first moment that a human intentionally summoned flame must have felt like a miracle, a victory against the gods themselves. The darkness that had once ruled the earth now had a rival, one created by human hands. Fire gave them control over time, the ability to extend the day, to gather in warmth long after the sun had vanished. It was the beginning of mastery, the dawn of human dominance. The uses of fire grew as understanding deepened. It gave light for work and protection, but more importantly, it transformed food. Meat roasted over open flames was easier to chew and digest, providing strength and warmth. The smoke cured the meat, preserving it for longer, a discovery that would feed generations. Around the campfire, humans began to gather in new ways. It became the heart of every community, the place where stories were told, songs were sung, and lessons were passed down. Fire was no longer just survival. It was civilization's first spark of culture. But with power came danger. Fires could rage out of control, turning forests and shelters into ash. Children who played too close risked burns or blindness from smoke. Early humans learned quickly that the gift of fire demanded respect. They began to treat it as a living being, something to be honored, not commanded. When the flames danced high, it was a good omen. When they sputtered or smoked black, it was a warning. Fire had its moods, its will, its mystery. Some tribes began to hold rituals before lighting their fires, whispering words of gratitude or tracing symbols in the dirt. It was the first form of worship, a connection between man and the forces of nature. As centuries passed, fire became the center of human ingenuity. It hardened the tips of spears, allowing hunters to pierce the hides of great beasts. It shaped stones into sharper tools. It gave warmth to dry hides and strengthened sinew bindings. Even the making of art, the pigments used on cave walls, was born from burnt minerals and charcoal. The flickering glow of firelight made those painted animals come alive on stone, their movements mimicking the dance of the flames. Fire had become both muse and medium, a silent partner in humanity's growing intelligence. At night, when the world outside froze solid and predators prowled the darkness, the campfire was the tribe's heartbeat. Its light pushed back the unknown, defining a small circle of safety amid the endless void. Around it, faces glowed amber, eyes reflected gold, and voices rose in rhythm with the crackle of the wood. Every pop, every spark carried meaning. In those moments, humans were not merely surviving. They were becoming something more: thinkers, dreamers, storytellers. Fire gave them more than heat. It gave them time to imagine. But perhaps the greatest gift of fire was psychological. It gave hope. Even in the blackest nights, when the cold crept through stone and bone alike, the flame stood as a symbol of endurance. It reminded them that warmth could be created, not just found, that life, though fragile, could push back against the darkness. It was a lesson they would never forget. Long after the Ice Age ended, long after the glaciers melted and the earth turned green again, the memory of those first fires remained. Every modern hearth, every candle, every spark of light in the night sky is a whisper from that ancient past, a reminder of the moment humanity learned to fight the cold not just with their bodies, but with their minds. The first flame was more than heat. It was the beginning of control, of invention, of faith. In the age of endless winter, fire was the only sun that never left. And as it burned, it taught early humans the most important truth of all, that survival is not given by nature. It is earned, one spark at a time. Before the invention of tools or weapons that defined later ages, survival in the Ice Age demanded one essential innovation: clothing. It was not fashion, it was life itself. Without fur, without hide, without layers to protect against the cutting wind, no human body could endure the freezing bite of winter nights. For early humans, every piece of clothing was born from necessity, every stitch and wrap a triumph against extinction. They had no woven fabrics, no thread, no needles, only raw instinct and the materials torn from the beasts they hunted. Yet from these crude beginnings, they created the first garments known to humanity, a revolution as vital as the discovery of fire. In the earliest times, before the full chill of the Ice Age descended, human skin was their only barrier. But as the planet cooled, as snow blanketed the world and temperatures fell below anything they had ever known, survival demanded adaptation. Watching animals was their first teacher. They saw how wolves, bears, and mammoths thrived in conditions that killed men in hours, not because they were stronger, but because they were wrapped in warmth. So humans began to imitate nature, using the very skins of those creatures to shield themselves. Every hunt now had two purposes: food for the stomach and fur for the flesh. At first, they simply draped animal hides over their shoulders, crude cloaks made from the skin of deer, aurochs, or bison. But as time passed, skill replaced chance. They learned that fresh hides were stiff and cold, so they began softening them. Some chewed the edges until the fibers loosened, while others rubbed animal fat into the skin, making it pliable and warm. Through endless trial and error, they discovered the process of tanning, a method that preserved the hides, preventing them from rotting. The process may have been primitive, but its impact was monumental. For the first time, clothing could last through seasons, not just days. Tools became part of the process. Flint scrapers were used to clean hides, and sharpened bones pierced holes for lacing. Strips of sinew, dried animal tendons, became the first thread, binding pieces of fur together. Soon, these early people were crafting fitted garments, leggings, tunics, boots, and even hoods. The seams may have been rough, but they worked. A layer of fur on the inside trapped heat, while the outer skin repelled wind and snow. This was more than protection. It was engineering born from observation and necessity. Clothing also became a mark of skill and pride. Those who could tan, stitch, and shape hides well were revered, especially in the coldest regions where craftsmanship meant survival. Some tribes began decorating their garments, carving patterns into the leather, hanging teeth, beads, or shells as symbols of strength or fertility. What began as survival slowly turned into culture. The clothes of a hunter told his story, what animals he had conquered, what journeys he had survived. A cloak made from a bear's hide was not just warm. It was a statement of courage. In time, specialization appeared. Certain members of the tribe, often women, became expert hide workers, passing down their techniques to the next generation. The act of sewing by firelight became sacred, a shared ritual of creation and care. Around them, children slept wrapped in soft pelts while the elders mended old garments, whispering stories of great hunts and harsh winters. Clothing, like fire, bound them together. It was the thread that connected family, memory, and survival. Different regions developed their own styles, shaped by the animals they hunted. In the frozen plains, mammoth and reindeer hides offered unmatched insulation. In forested lands, lighter deer and fox furs allowed for easier movement. Coastal tribes wove reeds, grass, or fish skins for protection from wet cold. The ingenuity was limitless. Humans had begun tailoring their environment to suit themselves, no longer mere victims of nature, but its competitors. The mastery of clothing also allowed migration. Wrapped in layers of fur and leather, early humans pushed further north than ever before into lands once thought uninhabitable. This expansion changed everything. New territories meant new food, new challenges, and new rivalries. Without clothing, the Ice Age would have trapped humanity in narrow zones of warmth. But with it, they became wanderers of the frozen world, claiming spaces even the beasts avoided. The preparation of clothing was as important as the hunt itself. After a successful kill, every part of the animal had a purpose. The meat fed the tribe, the bones became tools, and the hide became armor against the cold. Even the fat was used, rubbed into skin and hair for warmth, or burned to soften the leather. Nothing was wasted, because waste was death. Survival demanded reverence for every life taken. Many tribes even offered small prayers before cutting a hide, thanking the spirit of the animal for its gift of warmth. But clothing was not only a defense against the cold, it was also a symbol of transformation. When a hunter wrapped himself in the skin of a wolf, he did not just wear protection, he carried the spirit of the creature. He became faster, fiercer, more in tune with the wilderness. Rituals were often built around this belief. During certain hunts or ceremonies, people wore animal heads, horns, or feathers to draw strength from the natural world. These ancient traditions were the roots of shamanism, the belief that man could bridge the gap between himself and the wild through the skins he wore. Over thousands of years, this knowledge deepened, evolving from instinct to art. Early needles made from bone and ivory became more precise. Stitching patterns improved. Some tribes discovered that layering hides created better insulation, while others lined garments with dry grass or moss for extra warmth. Eventually, humans learned to dye hides using crushed minerals and plants, giving color to their creations. Reds, browns, ochres, and blacks, the hues of the earth itself. Each innovation meant one thing: power. With clothing, humans were no longer bound by the mercy of the seasons. They could plan, travel, explore, and build even in the harshest environments. Their resilience grew, their imagination expanded, and with every new generation, they became more than survivors. They became masters of adaptation. So when the blizzards roared across the tundra and the stars shimmered above the frozen horizon, early humans stood wrapped in the warmth of their own creation. The furs they wore were not just garments. They were proof of ingenuity, of observation, of courage. Each hide told a story, each stitch a memory of struggle and triumph. And though millennia have passed since those first cloaks of skin, the instinct remains within us still, the drive to shield ourselves, to adapt, to survive. In the silent, icy world of the caveman, clothing was not vanity. It was the first expression of human intelligence. It was proof that even in the face of nature's cruelty, mankind would always find a way to endure. There was a time when fire was nothing more than a distant, terrifying force. It crackled in the forest after lightning strikes, devouring trees and filling the sky with black smoke. To the early humans, fire was both beauty and danger, something to be feared, admired, and eventually pursued. Before they learned to control it, the nights belonged to predators. The cold was an unrelenting enemy, seeping into their bones, stealing their strength and breath. But once they learned to harness fire, everything changed. It was not merely the discovery of warmth. It was the discovery of civilization itself. Fire was the dividing line between beast and human, between mere existence and mastery of the world. At first, fire came only by chance. A bolt of lightning striking a dry tree, a spark born of rock against rock, or a wildfire tearing through grasslands. These were the rare moments when flames appeared in nature. The early tribes watched in awe from a distance. Some fled, fearing the red beast that roared and consumed everything in its path. Others, braver or more desperate, approached after the storm had passed. They found smoldering logs, faint embers glowing like eyes in the ash. Slowly, carefully, they carried these coals back to their shelters, wrapping them in bark or moss to keep them alive. For the first time, humans had captured the sun. Fire was fragile. It had to be fed, protected, and understood. The first keepers of fire were treated with reverence, almost like priests. They learned how certain woods burned longer, how damp logs suffocated the flame, how wind could both strengthen and destroy it. To lose fire in winter meant death, so someone was always assigned to watch it, even through the long, dark nights. They built stone rings to contain it and surrounded it with their families. In its glow, they found not just heat but hope. Fire transformed every part of life. It dried their clothing, hardened their weapons, and cooked their food. Before fire, humans ate raw flesh, cold roots, and frozen berries. With fire, the taste of life changed, literally. Cooked meat was softer, safer, and more nourishing. It allowed the body to absorb energy faster, and perhaps even helped the human brain to grow larger over generations. Around the fire, the human species began to evolve, not only in body but in mind. But the flame did more than feed the stomach. It fed the soul. In the darkness of the Ice Age, where the nights stretched endlessly and shadows whispered of unseen threats, fire became a circle of protection. Animals feared it. Wolves, lions, and bears stayed away from its flickering glow. Within that circle of light, families found safety, children slept, and stories were born. Every fire became a gathering place, a small universe of warmth surrounded by the cold void beyond. The glow of the fire reflected in their eyes, and for the first time, those eyes began to dream. The art of making fire, not just finding it, came much later, but it was perhaps the most significant leap in human history. Through observation and patience, they discovered that two stones, when struck together, could create sparks. Flint and pyrite became the first ignition tools. Later, they learned that friction could summon flame, rubbing dry wood with bow drills or spinning sticks until the heat birthed a wisp of smoke. That first flicker, rising from the dust, must have felt like a miracle, a god appearing in their hands. And once they mastered this art, they were never helpless again. Fire also changed their relationship with time. Before its discovery, the day ended with sunset. Afterward, humans extended the night. The flame became a second sun, allowing them to craft tools, cook, or talk long after darkness fell. It gave them control over the rhythm of their existence. In the dancing light of the flames, the first shadows of culture appeared: storytelling, music, ritual. The fire was not only warmth, it was theater, memory, and communion. Around those early campfires, elders began to share tales of hunts, spirits, and ancestors. Children listened wide-eyed, learning through imagination. Sparks flew upward into the night sky, and perhaps it was in that moment, watching the tiny lights vanish into darkness, that humanity first looked at the stars and wondered. The fire had awakened curiosity, and with it, the beginnings of thought that would one day lead to science, myth, and philosophy. Fire also became sacred. Many tribes believed it was a living entity, a bridge between earth and heaven. Some saw it as the breath of the gods, others as the spirit of their ancestors. They fed it carefully, never letting it die without prayer. To extinguish the fire carelessly was an act of disrespect, even blasphemy. Fire rituals became central to early belief systems. Offerings of food, bones, or herbs were thrown into the flames as gifts to unseen forces. In those rituals, humanity began to express something new: gratitude, reverence, and connection beyond survival. Yet fire was not only creation, it was destruction. When uncontrolled, it could wipe out forests, shelters, and lives. Early humans learned that mastery came with responsibility. They feared it as much as they revered it, understanding that power and danger were two sides of the same flame. This duality, warmth and death, light and shadow, shaped their worldview. In every spark, they saw both promise and peril. With fire, humans also began to shape their tools in new ways. Heat hardened wooden spear tips and later allowed the creation of stone blades with sharper edges. Eventually, fire would lead to pottery, metal, and technology, but in those first ages, it was still raw, sacred energy. It made life bearable, journeys possible, and survival certain. No longer did they have to retreat from the cold. They could face it, illuminated and alive. And so, in the heart of the frozen wilderness, a circle of fire burned against the dark. It cracked and hissed, throwing shadows on the cave walls, shadows that danced like the spirits of the past. Around it, men and women sat close together, sharing warmth, food, and stories. Above them, the wind howled, snow fell, and predators prowled, but inside that circle, there was peace. The flame flickered in their eyes, a reflection of the power within them, the power to adapt, to create, to endure. The mastery of fire was not just the triumph of intelligence. It was the birth of human spirit. It was proof that even in the bleakest age, humanity could find light. The caveman's fire was more than survival. It was defiance, a declaration that no force of nature, no endless winter, could extinguish the will to live. When the world turned cold and the wind howled like a living creature, the caveman's most urgent need, after fire and food, was a place to hide from the fury of nature. Shelter was not luxury. It was survival carved from desperation. In a world where blizzards could erase the landscape in minutes, the difference between a warm cave and the open tundra was the difference between life and death. Every evening, as the sun sank and the shadows stretched long across the snow, early humans searched for safety: a roof against the heavens, walls against the wind, and warmth against the endless cold. In the beginning, nature provided. Caves were the first homes, dark hollows and cliffs and mountains that offered protection from predators and storms. They were damp and cold, but they stood firm when no other refuge existed. Inside these caverns, the flicker of fire transformed the black stone walls into something alive. Smoke coiled up to the ceilings, mixing with the smell of earth and burning fat. The first cave families gathered there, wrapping themselves in furs, their silhouettes dancing against the stone. In those small, glowing chambers, humanity began to build something sacred, the idea of home. But not all regions had caves, and not all caves were safe. Some are already occupied by bears, wolves, or lions. Others collapsed under the weight of snow and ice. So humans began to build their own shelters, using whatever materials they could find in their frozen world. On open plains where the wind never stopped, they drove mammoth bones into the ground like pillars. Over these, they stretched hides of reindeer, bison, or mammoth skin, securing the edges with stones and snow. These bone dwellings stood low and round, their shapes designed to deflect the storm. Inside, the air was still and warm, filled with the scent of smoke, sweat, and life. Each shelter was a masterpiece of necessity. Walls of packed snow, like those of later igloos, kept the heat trapped. Entrances were dug low to prevent cold air from rushing in. Animal fat sealed cracks, keeping out drafts. Stones heated in the fire were placed in the corners to radiate warmth through the night. Every detail, though simple, was the result of generations of experimentation. These early architects of survival didn't have blueprints or mathematics, only the lessons of hardship and instinct. And through that instinct, they learned to shape the land itself to their will. As the centuries passed, shelter evolved from mere refuge into community. Small family huts clustered together, forming the first human villages. Smoke from dozens of fires rose into the pale sky, marking the presence of life in the frozen silence. Within these clusters, cooperation thrived. People shared labor, one group hunting, another tanning hides, others maintaining shelters. Survival was no longer an individual task. It was a shared effort. In these early settlements, humanity began to find not only safety, but belonging. Inside their shelters, life took on a rhythm. Mornings began with smoke curling from the central fire, children bundled in furs, elders tending the embers that had survived the night. The walls echoed with the soft sounds of speech, laughter, and song. Outside, the storm might rage, but within, there was warmth, physical and emotional. The shelter became a womb of memory, where the young learned the skills of their people and the old passed down stories that shaped identity. Decoration soon followed function. The stone walls of caves became canvases. Charcoal, clay, and ochre were used to draw bison, horses, and mammoths, scenes of hunts, spirits, and dreams. These paintings were not idle art. They were communication, ritual, and reverence. The cave itself became sacred ground, a place where the boundaries between life and death, between man and nature, grew thin. The flicker of torchlight made the animals on the wall seem to move, to breathe. In those moments, early humans were not just surviving the Ice Age, they were learning to imagine. Beyond artistry, shelter also defined hierarchy and responsibility. The strongest hunters might have the largest spaces near the central fire, while the elders or healers had quieter corners. Children slept close to their mothers. Tools hung neatly on the walls, ready for use. Organization meant efficiency, and efficiency meant survival. The home became the center of human order, the point around which everything revolved. Shelter also taught humans the value of preparation. Before winter arrived, they repaired roofs, sealed openings, and gathered materials for insulation. They stored dried meat, stacked wood, and prepared fat lamps for the long, dark months. The first architects were also the first planners, creatures who could think beyond the moment. That ability to anticipate the future would later define the entire species. Over time, shelters became more elaborate. In milder regions, huts of wood, grass, and mud replaced temporary hides. In colder climates, humans built semi-underground dwellings, half sunk into the earth to trap the natural warmth of the soil. These early forms of insulation kept temperatures stable even in freezing conditions. It was an elegant balance between nature and invention, using the earth not as an obstacle, but as an ally. The birth of shelter also gave rise to boundaries. The concept of inside and outside. Inside was warmth, family, and safety. Outside was chaos, cold, and danger. This division shaped the psychology of early humanity. It created the idea of territory, of private space, of belonging somewhere. From those first bone huts and caves grew the foundation of villages, cities, and civilizations. Every skyscraper and home today still echoes that primal instinct to protect ourselves from storm. Yet, for all its innovation, the shelter was never entirely secure. Blizzards could still bury huts in snow. Fires could destroy caves. Predators still prowled near the entrances, drawn by the scent of food and flesh. Every night carried uncertainty, but that uncertainty made humans stronger. It taught them to reinforce, rebuild, and rethink. Each challenge was a lesson, each collapse a chance to start again, better than before. And so, in the heart of the Ice Age, humanity learned to create spaces of warmth in a world of deathly cold. A single fire inside a mammoth bone hut could mean life for a family. The walls whispered with the sounds of breath and heartbeat, the promise of another dawn. Outside, the snow fell endlessly, erasing footprints and memories alike. But within those humble shelters, something eternal burned. The will to endure, the dream of safety, and the quiet comfort of belonging. The caveman's shelter was more than a structure of stone and skin. It was a symbol of defiance. It said to the frozen earth, "You cannot have us yet." It was the first home, the first architecture of hope, the first human declaration that warmth could be created where none existed. Long before history was written, these primitive walls told their own story, one of courage, creation, and the unbreakable spirit that turned fear into foundation. Hunger ruled the Ice Age like an invisible god. It crept into bones, hollowed out bellies, and drove men and women into the teeth of the storm in search of food. In a world where nothing grew, where snow buried the earth for months at a time, survival meant one thing: the hunt. Every meal was earned through danger, through blood, through the sharp edge of stone against the hide of beasts far larger and stronger than man. The hunt was not just a task. It was the center of life, the heartbeat of every tribe. Without it, fire meant nothing, shelters meant nothing, for without food, all warmth eventually faded. The Ice Age landscape was both beautiful and merciless. Endless plains of white stretched toward the horizon, interrupted only by the shapes of grazing giants, mammoths, woolly rhinos, and reindeer herds that roamed in slow, eternal migrations. These creatures were the lifeblood of humanity. Their meat fed entire tribes. Their hides became clothing and shelter. Their bones were carved into tools and weapons. But to take down such beasts required more than strength. It required cunning, cooperation, and courage beyond measure. In the early days, hunting was raw and personal. A single man with a sharpened stick, creeping close enough to strike before being trampled or gored. Many died this way, crushed beneath hooves, impaled on tusks, or left behind in the snow. Yet from failure came learning. Over generations, humans developed strategies that mirrored the intelligence of predators. They learned to read the ground, to see where herds had passed, to recognize tracks, droppings, and broken branches. They studied the wind, knowing that one wrong gust carrying their scent could end the hunt before it began. Soon, hunting became a collective ritual. Small groups formed, each member playing a vital role. Some drove animals toward hidden traps. Others waited in ambush, armed with stone-tipped spears and wooden clubs. The most skilled hunters led the charge, their faces painted with ash and blood to invoke courage. Every kill was an explosion of chaos, the thunder of hooves, the scream of prey, the clash of life against death. When at last the beast fell, silence followed, a silence heavy with awe, gratitude, and relief. The hunt was dangerous not only because of the prey, but because of the world itself. Blizzards could erase trails in moments. Ice could crack underfoot, swallowing hunters whole. Predators, saber-toothed cats, cave lions, dire wolves, stalked the same herds, often attacking both human and animal alike. In this frozen theater of survival, man was both hunter and hunted. Every expedition was a gamble with death, and every return to camp a victory worth celebration. Weapons became the tools of evolution. The hand axe, the spear, the atlatl. Each innovation increased the hunter's reach and safety. Flint was shaped into blades sharper than claws. Wooden shafts were balanced for flight. Fire-hardened points pierced the thick hides of mammoths, while stone traps and pitfalls became silent allies. These inventions marked the dawn of human ingenuity. For the first time, survival depended not on raw strength, but on thought, on the ability to imagine, design, and outsmart. But hunting was not only about food, it was also about meaning. To hunt was to prove one's worth, to earn respect, and ensure the survival of the tribe. The greatest hunters became leaders, storytellers, and heroes. Around a fire, they recounted their battles with beasts, their scars illuminated by flame. These tales became the first legends, oral histories that taught courage and unity. Children listened in awe, their small hands gripping stones, dreaming of the day they too would face the great animals of the ice. And yet, beneath the pride of the hunt was humility. Early humans understood that each life taken carried a cost. Before a kill, many tribes performed small rituals, whispers to the wind, gestures to the sky, asking forgiveness from the spirit of the animal. Afterward, nothing was wasted. The meat was divided carefully among the tribe. The bones became tools and ornaments. The sinew became thread. Even the teeth were strung into necklaces, worn as symbols of gratitude and remembrance. Through these acts, hunting became more than necessity. It became communion, a sacred exchange between life and death. The rhythm of the hunt followed the rhythm of the seasons. In spring and summer, the world awakened, and herds returned. Tribes followed their migrations, moving across vast distances, carrying fire and memory with them. In autumn, they hunted more than they could eat, drying or smoking the meat for the bitter winter ahead. And in the deep heart of winter, when prey grew scarce and snow swallowed everything, they survived on what they had stored, proof of foresight and cooperation. The success or failure of one hunt could decide the fate of an entire clan. The hunters themselves were shaped by the life they lived. Their bodies grew strong, their senses sharp. They could move silently across ice, smell the air for miles, and hear the faintest crack of snow beneath hoof or paw. They were both students and masters of nature, bound to it by the same laws that governed every creature. Yet unlike any other, they carried within them the spark of awareness, the understanding that they were different, that they could plan, imagine, and remember. This consciousness turned the act of hunting into something almost spiritual, the human struggle against the wilderness, the eternal dance of survival. But even the most skilled hunter faced failure. Sometimes, after days of pursuit, the herd would vanish into fog, leaving only empty tracks. Sometimes, wounds turned to fever, and the strong were carried back to the camp only to die days later. Every hunt carried grief as well as glory. Around the fire, women and children would wait for returning shadows on the horizon, counting, praying. When fewer figures appeared than had left, the silence said everything. In those moments, they understood that survival was never guaranteed, only borrowed from the mercy of the earth. Despite this, the hunt continued because it had to. Hunger does not rest, and the Ice Age offered no kindness. The drive to feed one's people, to keep the fire burning and the children alive, became the unbreakable chain linking one generation to the next. Through endless winters and shifting lands, humans learned to face their fear, to adapt their methods, and to trust one another. In this unity, they found strength beyond the individual, the beginnings of community, of culture, of civilization. The hunt was not merely about killing animals. It was about understanding life itself, the fragile balance that kept them alive amid the cold. Every track in the snow, every fallen beast, every shared meal was a lesson in humility, courage, and endurance. In the eyes of the Ice Age hunter, the world was not an enemy, but a teacher. Harsh, yes, but fair. It demanded respect, patience, and bravery. And from those demands, it shaped the first true humans, thinking, feeling, and forever reaching for survival against impossible odds. So, when we imagine the caveman raising his spear against a charging mammoth, we are not just witnessing a hunt. We are witnessing the birth of destiny. The fire of hunger, the fear of death, and the will to fight fused together in those frozen plains to create what no other creature could ever achieve. The power to endure, to learn, and to rise above the wilderness. In the echo of those ancient hunts still lives the heartbeat of humanity, wild, defiant, and eternal. Before words, before writing, before the first trace of civilization, there was fire. It was humanity's first teacher, first ally, and first mirror. In the endless cold of prehistory, when nights stretched for hours and predators prowled just beyond sight, the fire's glow became more than just warmth. It was meaning. To the caveman, fire spoke in crackles and smoke, in light and shadow. It became the first shared language that needed no sound, no words, only presence. When darkness fell over the Ice Age plains, the difference between life and death could be as small as a spark. Without fire, the night was an enemy. The cold would creep through the skin, and unseen eyes would glint in the distance. But with fire came control. It was the first time humans held nature's raw power in their hands. That control changed everything. Around it, they gathered, learned, remembered, and began to think together. It was around the flames that humankind found its voice, not spoken yet, but expressed through rhythm, gesture, and shared emotion. Imagine a cold night some 40,000 years ago. The wind moans through the trees, and snowflakes whisper across the frozen ground. Inside a cave, a small group huddles near a flickering fire. The light paints their faces gold and red, while smoke curls up to the ceiling. A mother feeds a log into the flames. An elder sharpens a tool. A child stares, mesmerized by the dance of light. This is not merely warmth. It is communion. Every spark connects them. Every flicker draws them closer. For the first time, humans are not just surviving. They're sharing existence. Before language, fire allowed them to communicate emotion. The steady glow meant safety. A sudden flare signaled danger. A circle of light meant togetherness. The darkness beyond it meant threat. The movement of bodies around the fire, gestures, pointing, laughter, or warning, became their grammar. They didn't need words to understand the tone of a night. The fire's rhythm was the rhythm of their hearts. It was around fire that storytelling was born. When the hunt was done, when bellies were full and the howls outside faded, the tribe would gather to remember. The hunters mimed the chase, crouching, leaping, mimicking the cries of beasts, while others watched, learning through performance. The shadows cast on cave walls created the illusion of movement, transforming those stone surfaces into screens of imagination. Perhaps this was the first theater, the first form of art. Children learned about courage, adults laughed at their own fears, and elders passed down wisdom, all through gesture and flame. Fire turned silence into shared experience. Soon, it became more than survival. It became symbol. Fire represented life itself, the eternal spark that separated humans from animals. It was warmth against cold, light against darkness, order against chaos. To lose fire was to lose hope. To keep it alive through the night was an act of devotion. Tribes often guarded their flames as sacred, never letting them die. Some carried smoldering embers wrapped in moss or bark during migrations, ensuring that wherever they went, the light of home followed. Fire also became a language between groups. When tribes saw smoke rising from distant hills, they knew someone else is out there. Sometimes it was a friend, sometimes a rival, but always a signal of life. These smoke signals, though primitive, marked one of the first human communication systems across distance. Even the pattern of smoke, thick or thin, continuous or intermittent, might have carried meaning. In a vast and silent world, it was the first way to say, "We are here." The relationship with fire was both reverent and fearful. It could warm, but could also destroy. Early humans learned its duality through painful experience. A single spark in dry grass could ignite an inferno, consuming entire shelters and forests. The lesson was clear: power demanded respect. This understanding shaped the early human psyche, the realization that creation and destruction were two sides of the same force. In this sense, fire became the first moral teacher. It taught responsibility, discipline, and patience, the same virtues that would later define civilization. Archaeological findings suggest that cavemen didn't just use fire for warmth or cooking, but for socialization. The fire extended waking hours, allowing conversation, planning, and cooperation after dark. It created a space for intimacy, for sharing food, for teaching children, for dreaming aloud. The flickering light softened fear, making the night a time of reflection rather than terror. Some scientists even believe that fire helped evolve the human brain by allowing longer periods of wakefulness and bonding, fostering the development of complex thought and early language. But beyond science, fire carried emotion. To the cavemen, it might have seemed alive, breathing, moving, reacting. They fed it, nurtured it, protected it. When it hissed and roared, they listened. When it dimmed, they revived it. Over generations, this relationship deepened into reverence. Fire was no longer just a tool. It was a companion, a living presence that symbolized protection and spirit. It was the only force they could summon that rivaled the power of the sun. When lightning set a tree ablaze, it was as if the gods themselves had touched the earth, gifting them divine power. The psychological bond between humans and fire also changed how they viewed each other. Within the circle of light, faces became visible, expressions could be seen and understood. For the first time, emotions were read in eyes and smiles, not just in body movements. This visibility deepened empathy. People learned to recognize fear, joy, anger, and comfort, all illuminated by the same flame. It was, in many ways, the birth of emotional intelligence. Music, too, found its rhythm in the language of fire. The crackle of burning wood, the hum of voices, the beating of sticks on stone. Together they created rhythm and harmony. Fire inspired the first songs, chants, and rituals. Around it, they danced, their shadows weaving together on the walls, half human, half flame. This merging of body, sound, and light became a sacred experience. Over time, these fire dances evolved into ceremonies that marked births, hunts, and seasons. The fire became a witness to life's most important moments. In times of grief, the flame held meaning as well. When someone died, fire often accompanied the farewell, as warmth for the departing spirit or as purification of the soul. In the fire's smoke, they saw the journey of life rising to the heavens. The glowing embers reminded them that even in death, something burned on. Fire taught them that endings could also be transformations. Through all these experiences, fire became humanity's first metaphor, the spark of life, the light of knowledge, the hearth of home. It symbolized everything that made us human: awareness, creativity, unity, and hope. Even today, thousands of generations later, we still gather around its modern forms. Campfires, candles, lamps, even the soft glow of screens, seeking the same comfort and connection. The fire within us is both literal and symbolic. It represents the eternal need to see, to understand, to feel safe. In the vast story of human evolution, few moments are as defining as the mastery of fire. It was the moment we ceased to be creatures of nature and began to become creators within it. It gave us time to think, dream, and bond. It allowed us to cook food, increasing our nutrition and expanding our brains. It provided safety, light, and warmth, but more than that, it gave us meaning. So when we look back at the ancient world, at the flicker of flame in a stone cave, at the circle of figures gathered close, we are looking at the beginning of everything. The birth of language, the seed of art, the foundation of culture. Fire did not just keep cavemen alive, it taught them how to be human. And perhaps that is why, even now, the sight of fire moves us. It hypnotizes, soothes, and draws us in. Deep in our minds, we remember the endless cold, the dark forests, the shared warmth. We remember what it felt like to gather in silence, to speak without words, to belong. Fire was not merely an element. It was a teacher, a storyteller, and the first light of civilization. Long before the first civilizations rose, before written laws or cities of stone, the hunt was the beating heart of human existence. It was not merely a means of acquiring food. It was a ritual, a test of will, a language of courage and unity. For the cavemen, hunting was the defining act that shaped both their bodies and their minds. It was through the art of the hunt that humankind learned patience, strategy, communication, and sacrifice, the very qualities that would one day build societies. Imagine a frozen dawn on the Pleistocene plains. A group of hunters moves silently through the mist, their breath rising in white clouds. Spears are gripped tightly, eyes sharpened by hunger and instinct. The air is tense with anticipation. The mammoths ahead graze peacefully, unaware of the predators that walk upright, clothed in furs, minds burning with thought. Every crunch of snow beneath a foot could ruin everything. Every gesture from the leader carries meaning, a tilt of the chin, a wave of the hand, a silent command. The hunt has begun. To the cavemen, hunting was more than a battle for food. It was a school of survival. It demanded deep observation of nature, the way animals moved, breathed, drank, and slept. The hunter had to understand the language of the land, the whisper of wind through grass, the tracks pressed into mud, the broken twig that hinted at direction. Each mark was a message written by the wild. In learning to read it, humans learned to think abstractly, to infer, to predict, to plan. Hunting trained the brain long before writing ever did. But the caveman was not alone in his quest. Hunting required cooperation. A single man with a spear could not bring down a mammoth or a bison. Success depended on teamwork, on trust and synchronization. Some would circle wide to drive the prey forward. Others would wait in ambush, and a few would create noise or light to confuse the animal. Each person's role was vital, and each mistake could mean death. This was the crucible in which human communication evolved. Not in words at first, but in signals, sounds, and shared understanding. Archaeologists believe that the earliest forms of language may have been born from the hunt. Simple calls, short, sharp, urgent, would have been used to alert others or coordinate movements. Over time, these calls grew into more complex expressions, and with them, thought itself evolved. The need to cooperate demanded the ability to explain, plan, and remember. In chasing prey, humans were also chasing intelligence. The physical preparation for a hunt was intense. Weapons had to be crafted from stone, bone, and wood. Spears were shaped and hardened in fire, their tips sharpened with care. Hunters painted their faces with ash or clay to mask their scent and blend into the surroundings. Before setting out, some tribes performed small rituals, quiet gestures toward the fire, murmured prayers to the spirits of animals, or the drawing of symbols on cave walls. These were not mere superstitions. They were expressions of gratitude and respect. The cavemen saw animals not as enemies, but as sacred beings that gave life through their death. Tracking prey required immense knowledge. The hunters would follow footprints for miles, studying how deep they sank into the earth to judge the animal's size and speed. They would feel the warmth of droppings to know how recently the creature had passed. They learned wind direction to mask their scent, and they moved with the silence of shadows. Each step was part of a delicate dance between predator and prey, a balance of patience and precision. When a moment came to strike, every muscle, every heartbeat counted. The hunters would surround the animal, cutting off escape routes. A sudden shout, a throw of a spear, the stillness shattered into chaos. Dust rose, hooves thundered, and adrenaline surged through every body. The cavemen were no longer individuals. They were one organism, acting in unity. It was in this fire of motion and danger that trust was forged. No one could survive alone. Only together could they bring down the beast. When the animal finally fell, silence would return. The hunters would gather around their kill, not celebrating with cruelty, but honoring the life taken. They touched the creature's fur, whispered thanks, and sometimes left offerings of herbs, stones, or carved bones. The act of killing was always balanced with reverence. To them, life was a sacred exchange, one breath ending so that others might continue. In this understanding, the seeds of spiritual thought were planted. After a successful hunt, the tribe would return home triumphant. The camp would come alive with joy, laughter, songs, and the aroma of roasting meat. Fire crackled, and the night filled with celebration. Children ran around the flames, mimicking the hunter's movements. Elders retold the tale, shaping it into myth. The story of the hunt became legend, passed down from one generation to the next. These tales were not just entertainment. They were education, preserving knowledge about animals, terrain, and tactics. In this way, oral tradition began, the ancestor of all storytelling. The meat provided nourishment, but the hunt's value was greater than food. From the animal's bones came tools, from its hide, clothing and shelter, from its tendons, ropes and bindings. Every part was used, nothing wasted. This efficiency reflected a deep respect for the natural world. Cavemen understood the cycle of life better than most modern people do. They lived within nature's rhythm, not above it. To them, every hunt was a reminder of both power and dependence. They ruled the wild only because they understood it. In harsh winters, when prey was scarce, the hunt became a desperate struggle. Men and women alike joined forces, scanning endless snow for tracks. Hunger sharpened instincts. They learned to read the faintest sign, a broken twig, a trail of fur in the wind. Sometimes they failed, returning with empty hands and heavy hearts. But even in failure, lessons were learned. The next time, they would move differently, think differently. Every mistake was a teacher. Over time, hunting shaped not just survival skills, but the human body itself. Strong arms for throwing, sharp eyes for tracking, endurance for running long distances. Evolution favored the hunters, but it also refined the mind. Planning ambushes, remembering migration patterns, and coordinating with others required foresight and logic. The brain grew alongside the spear. The hunt was evolution in motion. And yet, the act of killing also awakened emotion. Early humans likely felt empathy for the creatures they pursued. They saw in them the same struggle for life, the same fear, the same desire to protect their young. This duality, the hunter and the compassionate observer, created the moral consciousness that would define humanity. The hunt was both violent and sacred, both brutal and beautiful. It forced early humans to confront the paradox of existence, that life and death were intertwined. The art of the hunt was not limited to the plains. In forests, hunters set traps. In rivers, they crafted nets and spears for fish. Along coastlines, they collected shells and hunted seals. Each environment demanded different strategies and tools, pushing innovation forward. The invention of the atlatl, a spear thrower, increased throwing power and range, showing how intelligence constantly adapted to need. These small steps in technology were milestones in human progress. Women also played vital roles in the hunting culture. While men often engaged in large hunts, women gathered plants, set snares, tracked smaller animals, and prepared food. Their knowledge of edible roots, herbs, and animal behavior was crucial. Many anthropologists now believe that this cooperation between the sexes was one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Unity, not dominance, ensured survival. Spirituality and the hunt were deeply connected. Many cave paintings, like those in Lascaux or Chauvet, depict animals in motion, painted with reverence and awe. These were not mere decorations, but invocations, prayers for success, gratitude for abundance, or attempts to connect with the spirit of the animal. Some shamans may have entered trance-like states, imagining themselves as the beasts they hunted, bridging the world between human and nature. Firelight flickering across those painted walls made the figures come alive, turning the cave into a temple of memory and magic. The hunt also gave rise to early social order. Leadership, hierarchy, and cooperation were born in its crucible. The best hunter earned respect, not just for strength, but for wisdom and fairness. Decisions had to be made: when to strike, when to retreat, how to divide the spoils. These decisions required consensus and diplomacy. Thus, the hunt became the training ground for governance. With time, the hunt evolved from necessity into ritual. Even when agriculture emerged, the echoes of the hunt remained, in festivals, in dances, in myths of heroes slaying beasts. The memory of the wild lived on in human blood. The hunter's spirit, brave, patient, resourceful, became a symbol of human endurance. In the vast story of human survival, the art of the hunt stands as a monument to ingenuity. It was never just about food, it was about identity. The skills learned in pursuit of prey, strategy, teamwork, empathy, foresight, became the foundation of civilization. Every arrow fired, every track followed, every story told around the fire was part of a grand evolution of the mind and soul. When we look back through the long corridor of time, we see that the hunt was humanity's first great art, the art of balance, of respect, of coexistence. It taught early humans not only how to survive, but how to live with purpose. The rhythm of the chase, the silence before the strike, the gratitude after the kill, all these moments were sacred verses in the poetry of existence. And though we no longer hunt as our ancestors did, their spirit lives within us still. In every act of striving, in every challenge faced together, in every dream pursued, the hunter's heart beats on. The art of the hunt was not just about taking life. It was about understanding it. It was about learning that true mastery over nature begins with reverence for it. As the Ice Age raged on and winter tightened its hold on the ancient world, one element stood between life and extinction: fire. Yet for the cavemen, fire was more than just a tool or a source of heat. It was a living miracle, a mysterious force that carried both power and meaning. It brought warmth, light, and safety, but it also awakened awe, reverence, and faith. Around the flickering flames of their campfires, early humans not only survived the cold, they discovered the soul of humanity itself. In the dark, frozen wilderness, where nights stretched endlessly and predators prowled unseen, the fire's glow was like a heartbeat against the void. It burned defiantly in the face of death, casting golden light across faces that had learned to endure fear. Every flame was sacred, a small sun stolen from the heavens and tamed by human hands. To keep it alive was to guard the essence of life itself. Losing it was unthinkable. It meant darkness, hunger, and certain death. This fragile relationship between man and flame became one of the first spiritual bonds in human history. The act of creating fire was almost a divine ritual. Before the invention of tools like the bow drill or flint striking, early humans often preserved embers from previous fires, carefully carrying them in hollow bones or dried moss. The spark was guarded like treasure. Women and elders ensured it never died, feeding it with twigs, bark, and breath. Later, when they learned to kindle fire from stone and friction, it must have felt like summoning the gods themselves. The first spark born from human hands was not just a triumph of skill. It was a moment of transcendence. Fire changed everything. It transformed caves into homes, fear into comfort, and isolation into community. The hearth became the center of tribal life, a circle of light where the tribe gathered to eat, rest, heal, and dream. Here, the boundaries between body and spirit blurred. As shadows danced on stone walls, imagination flourished. Stories, songs, and myths were born in that glowing circle. Around the fire, early humans learned to speak of things unseen. The spirits of animals, the mysteries of stars, the memories of the dead. The flames mesmerized them. They watched how it moved, alive, unpredictable, yet loyal. Fire consumed, yet gave life. It destroyed forests, yet cooked food that sustained tribes. In this duality, the cavemen saw reflections of their own existence. Both creators and destroyers, both fragile and powerful. This deep connection gave birth to primitive spirituality. Fire became the first altar, the first symbol of divine power. The concept of gods, of unseen forces controlling the world, may have been kindled right there in the heart of the flame. Many anthropologists believe that early humans viewed fire as a bridge between worlds, a link between earth and sky, between the living and the dead. Its smoke rose upward, carrying prayers into the heavens. Its warmth embraced the tribe like a spirit's touch. Even death rituals revolved around it. Cremations and offerings of meat or carved bones to the flames were seen as ways of feeding or communicating with unseen beings. Fire turned survival into ceremony and necessity into meaning. Beyond its spiritual role, fire gave the cavemen control over their environment for the first time. It hardened their wooden spears, kept predators away, and allowed them to cook meat, unlocking more nutrients and changing the human diet forever. Cooked food meant smaller teeth, shorter jaws, and more energy for the brain, a direct leap in evolution. But it also meant the beginning of culture. Mealtime became a social event, a time to share, bond, and teach. Fire made humanity not just stronger, but closer. On cold nights, the tribe would huddle near the fire, their faces flickering in orange and gold. The elders would speak, not just to pass the time, but to pass on wisdom. They told stories of creation, of the spirits of the hunt, of ancestors who walked before them. Children listened wide-eyed, watching both the flames and the storyteller's face, learning that the world was more than what eyes could see. These moments were the dawn of mythology, the point where memory met imagination. For the cavemen, everything in nature had spirit. The rivers, the mountains, the beasts they hunted, the storms that frightened them, and the fire that kept them alive. They lived in a world filled with invisible presences, each demanding respect. When lightning struck a tree and set it ablaze, they saw it as a message from the sky gods. When the fire crackled suddenly, they believed it was speaking, a spirit whispering secrets. The natural and supernatural were one and the same, woven seamlessly into daily life. Archaeological evidence supports this deep spiritual connection. In caves like Chauvet and Lascaux, ancient paintings depict animals surrounded by patterns of dots and lines, perhaps symbols of rituals or visions seen in firelight. Some chambers were blackened by soot, showing that fires were burned there deliberately, not for warmth, but for ceremony. The cavemen likely entered these caves to perform sacred rites, chanting, painting, or meditating in the glow of their torches. The flicker of light made the painted animals move as if alive, turning the cave into a living world of spirits and dreams. The connection between fire and community also shaped early morality. To share fire was an act of trust and kindness. A tribe that shared its flame with another ensured mutual survival. Fire symbolized generosity, warmth, and unity. Even today, we speak of keeping the flame alive as a metaphor for hope and togetherness, echoes of that ancient wisdom. But the flame also had its dangers. To misuse it meant ruin. Wildfires could destroy shelters and hunting grounds. A careless ember could turn a thriving camp into ashes. Thus, fire demanded respect, a balance of power and humility. It was both servant and master, just like nature itself. In learning to control fire, humans were also learning to control themselves, their anger, their greed, their impulses. The discipline required to tend the flame was a quiet lesson in civilization. As the millennia passed, the fire's meaning deepened. It became the center of rituals, festivals, and prayers. When new members were born, the tribe welcomed them by the fire. When someone died, their memory was honored with its light. Every great moment, victory, mourning, celebration, was marked by flame. In a sense, fire was the first witness to humanity's emotions, the silent companion of our evolution. The belief in fire spirit shaped how cavemen saw life and death. They imagined that, just as fire consumed wood and turned it to smoke, the soul, too, could rise and transform. Death was not an end, but a passage, like smoke disappearing into the sky. This idea, born in the fire's glow, became the foundation for religion, for belief in an afterlife, for the endless human search for meaning beyond mortality. Even today, the symbolic power of fire remains. From candles lit in prayer to eternal flames that honor heroes, from campfires that bring families together to hearths that warm homes, the fire continues to connect us to our ancestors. Its light still carries the same message, that even in the darkest times, warmth and hope can be created by human hands. The caveman's faith was not written in books or carved in temples. It was lived in every flame tended, every ritual performed, every story told in the fire's glow. They did not separate survival from spirituality. For them, to live was to believe. Fire was their teacher, their God, their mirror. It reminded them that the line between the physical and the divine was not a wall, but a spark, one that still burns inside us all. So when we sit by a campfire today, gazing into the flames as our ancestors once did, we're looking into the oldest form of worship, the worship of light in darkness, of warmth in cold, of life in the face of death. The fire that burned in their caves still burns in our hearts. And perhaps, somewhere deep inside, they're still there with us, shadows in the glow, whispering through the smoke, reminding us of the ancient truth they discovered first. That fire is not just survival. It is the soul of humanity itself. To survive the Ice Age was not only a battle of the body, but of the spirit. The world of the cavemen was cold, dark, and unforgiving, a place where death lingered close to every fire. Yet in that harshness, something remarkable awakened within early humans: belief. It began as instinct, a whisper of fear and wonder at the forces they could not see. But over generations, it grew into ritual, faith, and meaning, the invisible weapon that kept them alive when strength alone could not. As nights grew longer and the cold grew harsher, cavemen gathered around their fires not only for warmth but for comfort in the unknown. The flickering flames became symbols of life, of the sun, of rebirth. When lightning struck a tree or when the stars glimmered in a frozen sky, they sensed the presence of something greater, something beyond human reach. This was the birth of spirituality, not organized religion as we know it, but a primal awareness that life itself was sacred, fragile, and deeply connected to nature's mysterious rhythm. They began to see patterns in everything. The return of the sun after the longest winter night, the migration of animals, the sprouting of plants after snowmelt. These cycles told story. To the cavemen, nothing was random. They believed in spirits that lived within rivers, mountains, animals, and even the fire itself. When they hunted, they whispered gratitude to the animal's soul, asking forgiveness for taking its life. The earth, to them, was alive, a vast mother that provided, punished, and watched over them. Rituals slowly took form as a way to speak to this unseen world. Before hunts, they might rub ashes on their faces or mark their bodies with red ochre, believing the color of blood would grant them power. After death, they buried their dead carefully, often with tools, weapons, and ornaments. These burials were acts of love and faith, signs that they believed life continued beyond the grave. In their minds, no one was truly gone. They had only crossed into another realm, Around the fire, elders told stories of ancestors who roamed the sky as stars, protecting their descendants through the endless winter nights. These rituals also united the tribe. Shared belief gave them purpose beyond survival. When storms raged or food ran out, faith became their anchor. It gave them hope when logic could not. A dying hunter's last breath wasn't just a tragedy. It was a passage, a return to the spirit world. Children were taught these beliefs, not through words, but through actions, watching the elders chant, paint, and pray. Over time, these repeated gestures became the foundation of human culture itself. One of the most powerful rituals was the act of cave painting. Deep within dark caverns, far from sunlight, early humans painted animals, hunts, and mysterious symbols. These images were not mere decoration, they were sacred. Some archaeologists believe these paintings were part of hunting magic, a way to capture the animal spirit before the real hunt began. Others see them as early storytelling, a record of triumphs and fears. But whatever their purpose, one thing is certain. They were expressions of the human soul. With every brush of pigment, cavemen declared, "We exist. We remember." They also celebrated life through sound and rhythm. Primitive flutes made from bird bones, stones struck together, and rhythmic chants around the fire marked the first music, a heartbeat of humanity. The sound echoed through the valleys, perhaps to scare away predators or perhaps to remind themselves that they were not alone. Music like fire brought people together. It gave them courage. It gave them identity. Winter solstice, the longest night of the year, may have been the most sacred time of all. As darkness stretched endlessly, tribes performed rituals to call back the sun. Fires were kept burning through the night as symbols of hope. They might have danced, painted their bodies, and told stories of how light always returns after darkness. This was not only a spiritual act, but a psychological necessity. The act of believing that the sun would rise again helped them endure the endless cold. Belief also played a crucial role in leadership and decision-making. Shamans, or spiritual guides, emerged, men and women who were thought to communicate with the unseen. They read omens in the flight of birds, in the shape of smoke, or in the patterns of animal bones cast on the ground. Their words carried weight, not because they held power, but because they offered meaning. In times of famine or sickness, the tribe looked to the shaman for hope, guidance, and the will to carry on. These beliefs transformed survival into something more profound. Life became more than a daily struggle for food and warmth. It became a story. Every success, every loss, every storm had purpose. When lightning split the sky, it wasn't just nature's rage, it was a message. When a child was born, it wasn't just biology, it was a miracle. Through belief, cavemen found resilience. They learned that to survive physically, they must also survive spiritually. Perhaps the greatest legacy of their faith was the birth of empathy. To believe in spirits was to recognize that all living things had value, that killing without respect, wasting food, or harming the tribe went against the balance of life. These early moral instincts laid the groundwork for civilization. In their prayers, their art, and their rituals, we can trace the origins of compassion, responsibility, and purpose. Imagine one such winter night, snow falling quietly outside a cave, wind howling across the mountains. Inside, the fire burns low, casting warm light on painted walls. A child listens as an elder tells the story of a great hunter who became a star. The tribe hums softly, their voices rising with the crackle of the flames. For a moment, fear fades. They are not just survivors, they are dreamers, creators, believers. In the face of extinction, they choose to imagine something beyond themselves. And that choice, more than any tool or fire, is what made them human. Then came the winter that never ended. What had begun as small shifts in temperature erupted into a full-scale transformation of the planet. Snow no longer melted in spring. It simply layered upon itself, year after year, until the earth was buried beneath an empire of ice. Mountains disappeared under frozen caps. Forests cracked and fell beneath the crushing weight of frost. The seas retreated, locked away in massive glaciers that stretched for thousands of miles. The air itself seemed heavier, sharper, every breath a reminder that the world was no longer a place of comfort, but of endurance. Humanity stood at the edge of extinction, staring into a future colder than death itself. Imagine standing at dawn, your breath turning instantly to frost, the sun a pale, ghostly orb that gives no warmth. The once green valleys are now fields of white silence. Even the wind has changed its voice, a low, endless howl that cuts through the bones. Food has vanished, and so have the animals that once roamed freely. The herds have gone south, far beyond reach, and the ground that once offered roots and tubers is frozen solid. For early humans, each day became a test of willpower. Hunger clawed at their stomachs, frostbite nipped at their fingers and toes, and fear grew inside their hearts like a shadow that refused to leave. The Ice Age was not a single storm, but 1,000 years of punishment. Generations were born and died without ever knowing true warmth. Children grew up never seeing green leaves or hearing birdsong. The few fires that still burned inside caves were tended like sacred altars. One spark could mean the difference between life and oblivion. Families huddled together, wrapped in animal hides, whispering prayers to unseen spirits as blizzards raged outside. The nights were long, sometimes stretching so far that time itself felt broken. Even the strongest among them began to doubt whether the sun would ever return. In this frozen chaos, fear became both an enemy and a teacher. To survive, humans had to learn from the cold, to read the signs of storms, to sense the movement of ice, and to track animals through blinding snow. Every mistake carried a price. A fire built in the wrong place could choke them with smoke. A shelter too close to a cliff could collapse under the weight of snow. But those who adapted, those who watched, listened, and learned, survived. This was the crucible of evolution, where the careless perished and the careful grew stronger. Nature had turned ruthless, and humanity had to match her cruelty with intelligence. The psychological toll was immense. The cold wasn't just around them, it seeped into their minds. Isolation bred silence. Silence bred despair. Caves that once echoed with laughter became quiet tombs of endurance. People began to see the world in shades of gray and white, the concept of color fading from memory. Some tribes vanished entirely. Their remains later found frozen in the ice, preserved like echoes of failure. But others refused to give up. They found new ways to hunt, new ways to build, and new ways to hope. Even when the odds seemed impossible, the will to live burned faintly, a fragile ember that refused to die. It was during these dark centuries that humanity's greatest transformation took place. The harshness of the Ice Age did not destroy them, it forged them. They learned to cooperate like never before, to share warmth and knowledge, to protect the weak and honor the strong. The tribe became everything. No one survived alone. Around every flickering firelight, a code of survival was born, silent, unspoken, but absolute. Protect each other or perish together. That bond, that instinct for unity, became the foundation of all future civilizations. The Great Freeze also gave birth to the first myths, stories told to make sense of the endless suffering. The elders spoke of spirits that lived inside the glaciers, of sky gods who had stolen the warmth of the world, and of heroes who would someday bring the sun back. These were not mere tales. They were the psychological scaffolding that held their world together. When reality was unbearable, imagination became a form of survival. In those stories, they found courage, and in courage, they found meaning. For thousands of years, the Ice Age showed no mercy. It erased entire species, reshaped continents, and buried history under frozen silence. But against all odds, humanity endured. They were scarred, hardened, transformed, no longer the carefree gatherers of the past, but a new kind of creature, resilient, strategic, adaptable. The Great Freeze did not simply challenge them. It sculpted them into what they would one day become. The masters of change, the survivors of any storm. As the blizzards howled across endless tundras and the stars glittered coldly above, humanity's story narrowed to a single question. Would the fire within outlast the ice outside? In every cave, in every trembling breath, the answer was being written. Not in words, but in survival. And in that survival, the seeds of civilization were quietly taking root beneath the snow. As the ice tightened its grip on the earth, finding warmth became the single most important mission of survival. Fire alone was not enough. The flames could flicker and die in the open wind. What early humans needed was protection, a place to hide from the relentless storms that swept across the frozen plains. Shelter was no longer a luxury. It was life itself. And so began one of the most defining struggles in human history, the search for a home in a world that offered none. At first, people sought out what nature had already made. Caves became sanctuaries, hollowed out in the sides of cliffs and mountains, their dark interiors offering refuge from the blizzards outside. Within those rocky chambers, humans found something close to safety. They built small fires against the walls, their flames painting shadows that danced like spirits. The scent of smoke and animal fat filled the air, and the sound of wind howling beyond the cave mouth reminded them how fragile that safety truly was. The cave was both womb and prison. It sheltered them from death, yet confined them to darkness. Still, it was here, in these cold stone chambers, that humanity's first real homes were born. Inside these shelters, early humans began to organize their lives in new ways. Each corner of the cave had a purpose, one side for sleeping, another for cooking, another for tool-making. The flickering fire in the center became the heart of their world, its light the center of their existence. Families gathered around it, sharing warmth and stories, building bonds that grew stronger with every night survived. The outside world had become an enemy, but inside the cave, they forged something powerful: community. The experience of sharing space, of surviving together, was slowly shaping the human mind toward cooperation and planning. But not every tribe was lucky enough to find a natural cave. Many had to build their own shelters in the open, exposed to the full cruelty of the Ice Age. With little more than bones, hides, and branches, they began crafting the earliest forms of architecture. Mammoth bones served as the framework, massive ribs arched into domes and covered with layers of fur and earth. Inside, these bone huts trapped the precious heat from fires, turning freezing air into survivable warmth. These makeshift homes were small and crude, but to those who lived inside them, they were castles, sacred spaces where the storm could not reach. As tribes moved across the tundra, they carried their knowledge with them. Every new shelter was an improvement, every generation learning from the mistakes of the last. Some used blocks of packed snow, discovering that even ice, when shaped correctly, could hold heat. Others built walls from stones and clay, reinforced with animal hides. They began to understand the science of survival long before science had a name. How smoke should escape through holes in a roof, how air should circulate without stealing warmth, how light could be reflected by polished bones to brighten the dark. Necessity was teaching them engineering. Inside these shelters, life found rhythm again. Children played in the warmth of the firelight, their laughter muffled by the thick walls. Hunters returned with frozen meat, their breath steaming as they recounted the day's struggles. Women scraped hides, stretched sinew, and repaired clothing, their hands moving with purpose. The cold world outside had stripped away all comfort, yet inside these fragile homes, the essence of humanity endured. Love, fear, hope, and care all found their place within the flickering orange glow of the fire. But the struggle for shelter was not without danger. Avalanches could seal a cave entrance in moments. Fires could fill huts with choking smoke. Predators sometimes followed the scent of food and warmth, lurking just outside the walls. Every night was a reminder that safety was temporary, that nature's mercy was never guaranteed. The sound of the wind outside, shrieking like a living thing, kept them alert. In this balance between warmth and peril, they developed their keen senses, awareness of space, sound, and timing that would one day define human survival instincts. Caves and shelters became more than just places to rest. They became symbols, the first representations of human defiance against nature's indifference. Every stone placed, every hide stretched, was an act of rebellion. For the first time in history, humans were shaping their environment, not merely enduring it. These shelters were the seeds of architecture, the ancestors of every house, temple, and city to come. Within these cold sanctuaries, humanity learned what it meant to build, not just with hands, but with purpose and imagination. And as the snow fell endlessly outside, early humans would sit close to their fires, watching sparks drift upward toward the blackness of the cave roof. In that quiet, they must have wondered what lay beyond the next storm, whether the world would ever grow warm again, or if this frozen age would last forever. Yet the walls around them stood firm, their firelight flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. And in that heartbeat, the story of humanity continued, fragile, flickering, but unbroken.